The question I'm trying to address today is, when reading poetry, should you think more of the poem or the person who wrote the poet? And first I want to explain a little bit of the conflict and why this question arises, and then I'll explain what I think the answer is. So first of all, I think my general approach towards art is that the art should be based on its own merit and not judged on the person who wrote it. For example, when I listen to music, I try to evaluate the song itself and not listen to the person who wrote the song. The question I'm trying to address today is, when reading poetry, should you think more of the poem or the person who wrote the poet? And first I want to explain a little bit of the conflict and why this question arises, and then I'll explain what I think the answer is. So first of all, I think my general approach towards art is that the art should be based on its own merit and not judged on the person who wrote it. For example, when I listen to music, I try to evaluate the song itself and not listen to the person who wrote the song. There's this whole distance between you and a poet when you're reading most poetry, especially for poets you don't know, like T.S. Eliot or E.E. Cummings, people who are either dead or just you don't know, who live far away. I think it's kind of clear that the answer is just look at the poetry. Evaluate the poem for what it is, and look at it and analyze it and let it influence you, but you don't have to respond to the poet. You only have to respond to the poem, whether that's a response inwardly or if it's an outward response. However, when I'm reading poems that my friends write, I sometimes wonder whether I should be looking at the poem itself or if I should be looking to them, because it can seem kind of clinical almost to just be like, wow, this is a really good poem, it rhymed really well, it made me think about such and such, without actually talking to the person who's inside it, the person who is expressing those thoughts. So I guess when the poems are written by someone who's closer to me, I feel much more of a connection towards them, and I don't just want it to be about me and the poem and what I thought of the poem, but kind of connect with the other person and respond to them like a relationship. So in that sense, a poem is a lot different than fiction, because while fiction represents a story, something that isn't true, a poem can sometimes just be like an expression of yourself, like a speech or like a blog post. So sometimes it seems silly to talk about the poet, and other times it seems almost silly or objectifying to just talk about the poem. So I think what makes these two situations different is the purpose of the poem. When someone is writing a poem you don't know and they've published it and you're reading it, then you view the poem as art, and you view it as something, I guess, an expression of something. However, when you're reading a poem, at least when I'm reading a poem by someone I know, I don't just view it as expression, as something that stands alone. I see it as a communication or as a conversation. So I think understanding the two different purposes for poetry writing can help you understand how to respond to it. Now I'm wondering about how this applies to myself, because I wonder sometimes if I should take the trouble to explain what my poems mean, or if I should just let them figure it out for themselves. Because I think a lot of poets will write cryptic poetry, and I enjoy getting to read it once and not understand it, and then read it a second time, and then feel like I understand it more. Almost that a poem that was written purposefully will reveal more to you if you read it and study it more closely. So I wonder if viewing poetry as communication takes away its value as art. I also wonder if viewing poetry as art takes away its value as communication, and then how to reconcile the two. So I guess the most answer that I have is that we naturally gravitate towards wanting to talk and communicate and discuss with our friends, but not so much with people we don't know. But if you think about it further, as you get older and you start talking about ideas and writing essays, you really do join in a whole kind of other community, not a living and acting community, but a community of ideas. And it's just really interesting to think about how there are like a whole scientific community, an intellectual community of people who do share ideas, and then they respond to one another, just not so directly. So I think we shouldn't try to separate art and communication or try to dichotomize, but they're both important facets of writing and reading poetry. You know, it's possible that I'm misunderstanding the topic entirely, and maybe art and communication really are the same thing. So, I don't really have it all figured out, and I'm certainly viewing this video not as art, but as communication. So, in that vein, I would really enjoy to continue the conversation.